You've probably heard the chatter, right? In political circles all across Nigeria, there's this growing buzz about a familiar face making a return to the presidential stage, former President Goodluck Jonathan. But, beyond all the political talk and what people want, there's this huge legal question that could actually stop a campaign dead in its tracks.
And look, the idea is definitely catching on. You've got supporters who see him as the answer to some of the country's big challenges right now. Many of them are really pushing to get him on the ballot for the 2027 election. It's a great political story for sure, but as we're about to see, the real power here isn't in the rallies, it's in the courtroom and the Constitution.
So, while the calls for his return are getting louder, do they actually hold up legally? I mean, can he even run for president in 2027 according to Nigeria's constitution? To figure that out, we have to follow the evidence. Kind of like a detective story. So let's start with our first big clue.
Okay, our first major piece of evidence comes from a really important decision made by Nigeria's highest court. And it sets up a principle that we absolutely need to get our heads around. It's called the 8-year rule.
This all goes back to a 2012 Supreme Court case, Marwa versus Nyako.
And the court's decision was crystal clear. Nobody, whether a president or a governor, can serve for more than 8 years total. It doesn't matter if you serve them back to back or if there are breaks in between. The second you take that first oath of office, a constitutional clock starts ticking, and the grand total can't go over 8 years.
And listen to the court's own words from that judgment. They are so direct, the language is just absolute. No room for a cumulative tenure exceeding 8 years. Full stop. This isn't just an opinion or a suggestion. It's a binding interpretation of the Constitution from the most powerful court in the country.
So how does this 8-year rule actually apply to Jonathan's time as president? Well, let's look at the timeline. He was first sworn in way back on May 6, 2010, because he had to complete the term of the late President Omar Yar'Adua. Then, he ran, won, and served his own elected term, which wrapped up in 2015.
Okay, so let's do the math, because this is where the problem really jumps out. That first stretch in office, from 2010 to 2015, adds up to 5 years and 23 days. Now, if you add a potential new 4-year term starting in 2027, well, his total time as president would hit 9 years and 23 days.
And boom, there's the clash. On one side, you have that hard constitutional limit of 8 years, set in stone by the Supreme Court. And on the other, you have a potential new term that would push his total time in office to over 9 years. That looks like a direct violation of the rule.
Now, to be fair, there was an old argument that actually worked for him. Back in 2013, a high court gave him the green light to run, and it was all based on a very specific reading of the Constitution as it was written then.
The whole case rested on this one phrase. The logic was, since he had only been elected president one time, he was still eligible for another election. See, that interpretation was all about counting the number of elections he'd won, not the total time he had served. But that is not where this story ends.
Right, so that loophole we just talked about? Well, it didn't stay open for very long. This brings us to our second clue, and this one is even more direct. A brand new constitutional amendment that was passed specifically to slam that door shut.
The year everything changed was 2018. This was the moment the entire legal playing field shifted, and that loophole we just mentioned got sealed up for good.
In June of 2018, President Muhammadu Buhari signed what's called Constitution Alteration Bill No. 16, and its goal was totally clear: to stop anyone who finishes another president's term from turning around and then serving more than one more term of their own.
And here's the exact text. Now, I want you to focus on one little word here: was. The amendment doesn't say a person who is sworn in, it says a person who was sworn in. The use of the past tense there is everything. It means the law reaches back in time, and it applies to anyone who has ever been in that situation, including former President Jonathan. Because he completed Yar'Adua's term and then served one of his own, this clause seems to explicitly block him from being elected again.
So after following both of our clues, the big court ruling and the new constitutional amendment, what's the final verdict here? Let's put all the pieces together.
It really boils down to two massive roadblocks. First, you have the Supreme Court's very firm 8-year total limit on time served. And second, you've got that 2018 constitutional amendment, Section 137(3), which seems tailor-made to prevent exactly this kind of scenario.
So, the main takeaway is pretty direct. While the political momentum might be there, the legal foundation just isn't. Based on that judicial precedent and a very specific constitutional amendment, a 2027 run for former President Jonathan is, as the law is written today, explicitly prohibited.
And that really leaves us with a bigger, more philosophical question to chew on. This whole situation is a classic example of a tension you see in every democracy. When the written rules of the game seem to clash with what a lot of people politically want, which one should win out? It's a tough question, and definitely one worth thinking about.